Everybody, happy Football's Good Again Day, and welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox, and today I'm joined by the Mirror's political correspondent, Aletha Adu. Good morning, Aletha.
Morning, Susie.
Yeah, we're running a bit late because Aletha's been stuck in the strikes, which we are going to get into talking about straight away. But this is the People's Pay-Per-View, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening later on podcast are just going to have to cheer on the girls instead. So what have we got today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on an interview with RMT boss Mick Lynch, the best Prime Minister we're never going to have. Today, his members at Network Rail and 14 train operators are out on strike. And yesterday, Tory leadership hopefuls both promised, or Liz Truss rather, promised that if she became PM, she'd make it harder for people to go on strike with new laws to set minimum service levels, double the amount of notice required, increase the percentage of support needed, and take away their tax-free subsidies from the unions, which enable people to take that strike action. Rishi Sunak didn't say no to any of that. In fact, he said he'd do whatever it takes to stop the strikes. Now, unsurprisingly, perhaps, faced with this promise to make legal strikes more difficult, Mick Lynch is now saying there might need to be illegal ones instead. And he's calling for a countrywide fight back against what he calls a Tory war on workers. Now, take us through this, Aletha. What's his argument?
Yeah, so, I mean, I'll just read you some quotes that we've got in our splash. And he's saying, essentially, well, accusing the Tories of acting like extremists, as Margaret Thatcher did, really restricting people's power to strike. He said, we're at a real crossroads with these anti-union proposals coming on the back of the misery caused by the cost of living crises. And he said it's time for workers across the economy, whether you're a union member or not, to take a stand. So he's obviously calling others who are feeling, possibly a bit nervous about joining strike action to essentially act for themselves and, speak up and fight as, the Tories are essentially fighting amongst themselves. I mean, we must note, Susie, that the last time the strikes were happening, or the last time, a large majority of strikes were going on, Boris Johnson was still Prime Minister, and it was seen that he might have a real chance of clinging on to power, at least clinging on for the rest of this year. Over the last few weeks, we've seen a complete descent to power in the Tory government, as if that wasn't obvious beforehand. And they're now really struggling to show unity amongst themselves. So the public are now looking at this collapsing government. You've got the likes of Grant Shapps really trying to get Keir Starmer to fire the likes of Sam Tarry, the Shadow Transport Minister, who is now on the picket line. But they just don't have as much authority as they once did. So it's not just a war. They're not just creating a war amongst the people, workers that are striking. They're also just showing that they are losing their grip on crises like this. Because ultimately, Susie, it's not a difficult thing. If the government wants to really, raise better conditions for workers, they simply can at the click of a button, and people stop striking. But they're refusing to do so, and they're piling pressure on, calling people union barons like Mick Lynch, which is not really the case, is it?
No, barons, remember, people who inherited land and generally abused the serfs and stuff like that, and actually also held evil King John to account, got the Magna Carta signed, and established some of the first legislation for human rights. So barons have their upsides, shall we say. So there's a brilliant, you mentioned Grant Shapps, and there is a brilliant clip from his broadcast round this morning, which is doing the rounds on Twitter. We can't put it on the screen for you for technical reasons, but fundamentally, Grant Shapps says, in the 3 years that I've been Transport Secretary, there hasn't been a day without either a live dispute or a strike. and he says that's no way to run an industry. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever told Grant Shapps what his job is, but the RMT has been trolling him on Twitter and saying, mate, all you got to do is pick up the phone. We're here. We're waiting to speak to you. and they don't seem to be willing to have any kind of meaningful conversations about this. In fact, Grant Shapps, correct me if I'm wrong, Aletha, Grant Shapps isn't talking to Mick Lynch at all, is he? It's the rail operators talking to Mick Lynch, but the operators are being told what to say by Grant Shapps. Is that right?
You're bang on, Susie. And, he's refused to even engage, indirectly with these unions, with the likes of Mick Lynch, constantly since March. So not only does he not really have to get involved directly with them, but he hasn't really been doing his job for the last few months. So it's just completely unacceptable, and it's easy for them to sort of pass on the buck. But the reality is, my colleague Graham Hiscott, our colleague Susie, who's head of business at the Mirror, he got an exclusive story that is in our paper from Manuel Cortez, who is the head of the Transport Salaried Staff Association. He is warning that these strikes could run into next year. So they're not going away anytime soon. And as our other colleague notes, Jason Beattie, also in the newspaper, he's got a great analysis piece highlighting the fact that strikes do work. And, believe it or not, the Tories might have to cave in eventually. We've already seen the former Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, doing U-turns on his big proposals to not cut taxes. Now he's, essentially doing just that.
Which is Labour's been telling him to do.
Exactly.
So his great bid, this is amazing, isn't it? His great bid to be the next Conservative Prime Minister is to do what Labour's told him to do.
Right. Yeah. And this has happened with windfall taxes as well a few weeks ago. It's just the same cycle repeating itself. And it's just, it's pretty disappointing that the Tories just can't learn from their mistakes and just do the right thing as soon as a problem arises. This is all just problems. They're saying that they're on the public side. If they really are, there's a really simple method to avoid all of this disruption, and they're refusing to just do the easy and right thing.
Yeah, and it's worth bearing in mind that when you pay people more money, you get to tax them more. They put more into their pensions, which means more investment in the city. It means that they spend more in the economy, which means growth. And that's one of the things these two here, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, are saying is their big thing is about growth. And that means people earning more money. That's the only way you get growth. Anyway, so this is what basically they're talking. Mick says this is the biggest move against the union since they're legalised in 1871. Liz Truss's plans here, which she says are going to be what she will do in the first 30 days in office. And the Tories are saying that unions, they hold people to ransom, but Mick is saying it's the fat cats. They're holding the country to ransom because they're by not paying workers properly. It's more of a ransom, he says, that you can't feed your children or pay your bills. Claire says here, there's a reason for strikes. Maybe do the right thing in the first place and there wouldn't be any need for any of them. And, in effect, what Mick's saying in this interview is that what the Tories are doing, he says it's private and public sector workers who can't afford to exist, he says. And in effect, what the Conservative plans are is they're trying to almost extinguish some parts of society. If you can't afford to eat now and they're going to keep your wages low, where do you go in the future? And as Claire's got there, that there seems to be very widespread public support for this. In previous strikes that I can recall, people were quite anti. But this time round, because everybody's being affected by the cost of living and everybody's being affected by a complete lack of decent pay rises, then everyone seems to be fairly. Well, we've had the people on this show as well, our viewers. They're pretty pro, aren't they? Where can the Tories hope to go with it when there's a lot of public support?
Honestly, I have no idea what their strategists are thinking at this moment in time, apart from preparing to do another U-turn, which is just for them. I don't know how far they're trying to take
on a railway, though.
Yeah.
Table for one of those.
I think what helps them is this Tory leadership race. Obviously, it's taking a little bit of direct pressure from them. But ultimately, we're seeing the candidates having to debate these issues and prove to the public that what their plans what they propose would be the right thing and could, solve this issue. Clearly, that's not the case, seeing from what Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have both proposed. But it's just interesting that Grant Shapps, again, as I said earlier, is piling pressure on Keir Starmer to fire his shadow cabinet. I mean, Keir Starmer, since the last round of strikes, has been, largely silent. I mean, yesterday he came on Morning Round saying that, he hopes his shadow front benches are not on the picket lines. But it's quite interesting, Susie. I spoke to a senior Labour strategist who looks after their policy plans just 2 weeks ago, before I went on my lovely holiday. And she told me that it seemed like the communication between shadow front benches and her team had been sort of lost in translation. She told me that they weren't essentially trying to directly stop front benches from going on picket lines, and that they weren't trying to threaten them directly, but it was just that they didn't want the front benches to be mixed up within the direct chaos and become the story, instead of the workers being the story and them sort of like.
But is it the case then that, because what Keir Starmer has said publicly about it is that he says you need to be in opposition like you are in government, and if you were in government, you wouldn't be out on the picket lines. He said you're trying to resolve that dispute. So that's why he's not saying we mustn't be seen to support the strikes. He's saying we must come up with solutions for the strikes. We must act like grown-ups, so on and so forth.
But I think the issue came from, that a few weeks ago when the texts were sent round to front bench, and it was like, you will face some sort of penalty if you are seen. And everyone was just kind of like, whoa, this isn't school. And you had some of them like, oh, I didn't even get the message. So yeah, I'm going to defy his orders. And it was just like, oh gosh, here we go. Another sort of internal Labour Party row.
So is it the case then that I suppose the Labour front benches or the Labour members feel they've been sort of threatened somewhat by the leadership not to go out and strike? Or is it that some of the right-wing press are reporting the message saying, please don't go out and strike, and they're saying Keir has threatened his front benches because it suits their narrative?
I believe it's the former. I think many front benches don't like being shadow front benches, don't like being told what to do, and they're just feeling quite rebellious. I think it was largely left-wing papers and organisations that got the tip-off in the first place that, oh, this is the message some of them have received, and many of them are not very happy about it, but they followed Keir Starmer's orders anyway. Obviously, the government pounced on this, and you've got Grant Shapps now still saying, Keir Starmer is not great, he's not a great leader, he needs to get control of his own ship. He's not ready for government.
Most people are going to see that and go, it's not Keir Starmer's job.
Exactly.
I can see Keir's worried that, someone who's pictured on a picket line, even if they're a backbencher at the moment, might in a year or two be a transport secretary and might be a chancellor or something. Right. And that's not a good look for the Daily Mail to pull this out of the archives for the rest of time, saying, look what they did. They stood next to this one. And it's, I can understand why he's doing it, but perhaps the communication could have been a little
clearer. Yeah.
That could work, couldn't it? Now get into the comments, everybody. Tell us what you think. What do you think the Conservative leadership hopefuls should be saying about this? Because they should be being asked about the strikes. And they should be being asked what their solutions are for them. What would you like them to be? Do you want them to pay the strikers more? Do you want them to pay the strikers what they are? Do you want them to break these strikes somehow? What do you want? And why is it important? What do you think they should do? Because the fundamental issue, isn't it, Aletha, is that Liz and Rishi are talking at the moment to the Tory membership, this 160,000 odd bunch of people who are mostly male, mostly over 60, mostly in the south of England. Yeah. And you don't say to those people, someone's on strike, let's pay them more money and give them what they want. you say to those people, smash, Scargill, and then they're happy.
Yeah.
You have to go, Thatcher, we smash the unions, and then they will vote for you, which is what they're doing at the moment. But I'm a bit thinking about this, is that once Rishi or Liz, or both of them, or whoever, go into office and get whatever job they've got in the next government, how can they marry what they've said to the membership to get the job up with the realities of what their job is going to actually enable them to do? Because They've still going to have a divided party. They've still got very short time for the next general election. They've been talking to their membership. They've got to start talking to the general population quite soon.
Mm.
And if those people support the strikes, you can't bring in legislation to stop it. And if you start having wildcat strikes, which is what Mick Lynch is threatening, it's all, they're going to get to the point where their own membership perhaps are going, hang on, 5 minutes ago, you were telling us you would smash this. Now you're paying more, and that doesn't equate. So why should I vote Tory again in the future? They're going to lose their own. There must be a way through it for them. I just can't.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a really good point. And I think that's why during the early days of this Tory leadership contest, we heard lots of candidates like Penny Mordaunt, Tom Tugendhat saying, oh, I'm the candidate that the Labour Party would worry about the most, because obviously, they realise that after, September the 5th, whoever's next in number 10 will have to be appealing to Labour voters, Lib Dem voters, as well as the larger membership of the Conservative Party. But I think what is very worrying about what we've seen so far from this contest, and from what apparently Tory members want, is that we're seeing reports from the Telegraph of people, signing petitions that have been, created by the likes of Lord Cradock, the Tory peer. He was given his peerage by Boris Johnson, saying that they want this outgoing Prime Minister to be on the ballot paper, to be a choice between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. I think this is just where some of these members' minds are and their heads are. So it's worrying that they're really not thinking about crises that are going to be coming from January 2023. We've got people worried about their benefits that are not being raised enough, as inflation is going to continue to skyrocket into some real double-digit figures. And yet they're worried about Boris Johnson leaving number 10, Susie. I think it's amazing and it's confusing and it's a real interesting kind of thing.
But someone saying it's a lot like the Labour Party under Corbyn. There's a split between the membership and the MPs. So the MPs don't want them as leader and the membership do, which is why they're talking about this. And as Mike says here, with seemingly thousands, because we're not quite sure anybody can put their details into the petition with any old membership number, and apparently they've got to check it first. So at the moment, I think it's about 7,000 or 8,000, but it may get thinned out when they actually start verifying these signatures. With seemingly thousands of regional Tory members demanding that Johnson stays as Prime Minister, how long will his replacement last before he tries to bring them down? There's talk about him going on the back benches. He has said before he likes throwing rocks over the garden wall and listening to the sound of tinkling glass on the other side. And he does seem to think that, like Churchill, he's going to come back at some point.
Yeah.
Is there any route, I suppose, Aletha, is the question, is there any route with your Westminster hat on for him to stay as Prime Minister?
I've been really trying to dig through some of these 1922 committee rules and really, because once, essentially, Susie, we've seen what Boris Johnson is like since 2019, and even, when he was London mayor. If there is the tiniest of loopholes, he will force himself through that and he will essentially change the rules to suit him. We've seen that time and time again. It's not just with big scandals like Partygate and deciding to, give the likes of Chris Pincher promotions despite knowing their, horrid histories. But again, as you say, he said before he wouldn't mind throwing these rocks from behind, but that was before he became world king. I don't think his ego will allow him to take such a back step. So we've been seeing a number of questions being thrown at candidates, asking them, would you take Boris back into your cabinet? Because it's a very viable question. I'm sure if Liz Truss becomes Prime Minister, she's really struggled to criticise him publicly in any of these debates. He probably will have a seat at the table. And if that's not an option, we're hearing of him being talked up to become the next NATO sec, which is also quite bewildering, given that we've got the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, who's done such a fantastic job on Ukraine. He was sort of being lined up for that job. And suddenly Boris is like, actually, guys, I kind of need you to back me on this, despite having no proof of, anything viable that he's done for this country.
NATO Secretary General might be a step nearer being actual world king, so maybe he's thinking of that. But he has been a bit reluctant to go to Cobra meetings, so maybe maybe not the best move. Although I suppose if you were Prime Minister and if you could get him in your cabinet, he might be bound by cabinet responsibility, a collective responsibility, and therefore be less likely to be critical. But you couldn't put him in charge of anything that might involve a sex pest, because that is why he resigned. Maybe make him a peer, move him into the House of Lords, but would that get past the Lords Appointment Committee?
No.
Very difficult. We've got to move him somewhere he's not going to cause you any trouble, and NATO might be a good suggestion. Anyway, get into the question, get into the comments, ask us your questions, let us know what you think. The Tories keep calling the unions militant, and that's why we're having these strikes. But the unions have arguably always been militant, and they're not always on strike, so that doesn't make sense. A bit like blaming the French for the chaos at Dover when the same chaos is at the end. There are no French border stuff. Anyway, get into the comments and ask us your questions. We do have to move on because this was almost the good news, but it's not, because it's too good. Now, yesterday, there was an England football match where we won convincingly. It didn't go to penalties, and there was no hooliganism in Trafalgar Square. In fact, fans of our opponents, Sweden, were welcomed with open arms, and no one got too drunk and smashed a policeman over the head with a flapper. Does this mean football's reinvented itself? Does it, heck? It means that the women were playing, of course, and playing very well, Aletha. Now, you watched the highlights because you're busy doing some work at the same time. It all went pretty well, didn't it?
Yes, there was just this amazing backwards nutmeg that I caught a shot of, and it was just incredible. I can't go into the specifics, but I do remember there was a striker that just backwards nutmeg. It was just with the back of her heel, just whipped it into the back of the net. Classy finish there. And yes, as you say, it's remarkable that it ended on a really high note. We're not seeing any horrible reports of fights breaking out, people being rushed to hospital, and the police being called to different scenes because people weren't handing their drink. It just really shows that yes, when the girls are running the show, all is in order. Everyone's back, getting on with their day.
One of the fans that's quoted in the paper there is saying, and there's lots of male fans for this, it's got to be said. There's plenty of male football fans who go to the male football matches who were watching the female matches yesterday, and who probably behaved differently as a result. Perhaps they were there with their wives and daughters instead. Who knows? But there was a male fan quoted in the paper as saying, it's great watching the game because the Lionesses don't foul as much as the men. And they don't, and it's not about ego and masculinity and who's won and it's literally about who can win. It's different, entirely different, far more collective responsibility going on. Pamela says, if you want a job done properly, get a woman to do it. The Lionesses are smashing it. Very quickly, Aletha, before we move on, what do you think the chances are of A, the Lionesses winning the Euros, and B, making the boys all behave a bit better when it's their turn?
I think we've got every chance of winning them. I have full faith in their skills, really rooting for them as everyone is. We saw a picture of Keir Starmer and his wife tweeting from the ground yeah, it's 4-0. Everyone's just really chuffed and we're so proud. So sending them all of our best wishes.
There he is. And he's not got the football shirt on over his shirt tie. In fact, he's not wearing a tie.
Yeah.
I think not wearing a tie to the football makes him eminently more electable than the person who did wear a tie to the football,
right.
Mr. Johnson.
But on your second point, sadly, I don't think their amazing behaviour will have a knock-on effect on the men's football matches. We've just seen time and time again just how rowdy things can get. People assaulting their fellow football fans who are supporting the same team just because they look different. I think we've got a lot more to do in terms of really trying to open people's eyes to seeing the damage they're doing when A, they're just not handling their drink very well, and B, when people are just allowed free rein to just cause a ruckus afterwards. I don't know what more we can do, but I think we have to be talking to the men in our lives. It's really trying to educate them from the ground up, really. But I also must say that a lot of football commentators last night were highlighting and also urging schools to really try and up the football games and practices for young girls that have the talent to make it into pro football teams, but just don't have the support around them. I heard from a number of, women that were older than me saying they didn't ever have the chance to even consider certain sports when they were younger. They're around like their 60s, and they're hoping that girls now in their early teens, pushing 10 years old, will have the chance to do what they feel like. I mean, we're seeing the Lionesses play.
Perhaps there's, one of the big differences to the Lions and Lionesses, of course, is that the Lions have a lot of black players, and the Lionesses just don't have so much diversity in the team at the moment. Is that one of the reasons, the fact they don't have the encouragement perhaps to join in the same way that perhaps young black men do?
I think really, if we're going to try and focus on, diversity between races, we really just must make it easier for women as a whole to just go into this career path if they choose to do so, and if they've got the talent to do so, and if they just love playing the game. It's even hard enough just trying to find, social football clubs to play like every once in a while, just to get the spaces as a woman to do so. So before we can even talk about diversity within, women football teams, we really just must make sure that, in 2022 going into 2023, we're nailing this, and young girls can choose to do whatever they want to do. It's a free country. Yeah.
And have no one tell them that they can't do something because they're a girl.
Totally.
I heard a little while ago about someone who was just playing in a local local team, a women's team, and they've been playing on this same pitch for years, and they just got told to leave for no good reason. Nothing had gone wrong. They just, no, we don't want you to do this anymore, and they replaced them with the boys team.
Wow.
That's in a local pitch, some local town or suburb, and it's just because the boys game is more important. But we'll have to see, won't we? But in terms of, we do have some good news coming up. Excuse me, frog in my throat. So get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll try and wrap at the end. But what do you feel about the train strikes? What do you think the Tory leadership contenders should be doing to end this and bring it to a close? Where are you on the Lionesses? Do you think that the men's game and the women's game are comparable, or do you think that the women are doing it better? Get into the comments, let us know. But first off, there is some good news in the world, and here it is. Now, regular viewers of this show will know that I am a big fan of canines, foxes and dogs and wolves, as opposed to cats. And today this has been borne out by yet another piece of brilliant scientific discovery, which comes from University of the Bleeding Obvious, if you ask me. And it establishes that cats are just horrible to people.
Susie, come on. Susie, I'm going to call out.
So, a team from Toyama University in Japan has worked out that owning a dog reduces depression for pregnant women and new mums, while owning a cat actually makes it worse. They say that dogs are better companions, they have more empathy, they can boost their owner's self-esteem. And the researchers say that the fact that cats can't do that is because they haven't lived with humans for as long. Other people might say it's because they're cats. But Aletha, is it perhaps a good idea, I don't know, to make sure that every football fan has a dog? They behave a little bit better?
Yeah, I'd say actually, if we're going to get dogs involved, we should try and get more German Shepherds on the street. Get German Shepherds on the streets with police. They're amazing, gorgeous dogs, but they're also very disciplined. They can create, law and order.
No, I think maybe just actually having a dog as a friend is what we're talking about here, as opposed to...
No, I know. I would say, though, as loving cats and loving dogs, and having owned a cat who is not with us anymore, but I think it really just depends on the cat's nature. I think cats have a really bad rep of, being really independent and not caring about their owners, and just sort of coming in when the food bowl's been filled and then just dashing out for like days on end. But they really are affectionate.
Face off with claws, suffocate you in your sleep.
That's just them being close to you. And once I remember just waking up in the middle of the night. It was quite scary, but then obviously I did the research. Basically, my cat was like on my chest, just looking straight into my eyes. And I was just like, oh my God.
Yeah, I have a theory about this, Aletha, right? It's only a hypothesis, I suppose, rather than theory. But it is that the difference between cat people and dog people is that dog people are happy and loving and outgoing and prepared to share affection with others, which is why they're like dogs. Whereas cat people just want to be abused. And
so I'm both then? I love cats and dogs.
You woke up with an animal filled with teeth and
That
claws.
is him trying to
Staring
protect me. His claws weren't out. Okay, let's just clear the record.
Apparently planning your murder, and you went, "Oh, this is all my fault."
He was protecting me. That's his way
All
of
right,
saying
okay.
I'm there. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure there are many abused people who tell their psychiatrist the same thing, Aletha. We'll have to wait and see, won't we? Whether perhaps Tommy Robinson gets a nice dog and calms down. That would be.
The next time I'm on Susie, I'm going to do my research. I'm going to find some more studies proving just how amazing cats are. And
Yeah. You go and find the science that says cats have empathy and make people happy. You come back here, and we'll have a whole half hour on it, because I'll need that long to laugh.
Be prepared, yeah.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Aletha, for taking part and tolerating my cat abuse. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. Well done, the Lionesses. And if you want to listen and podcast, if you could leave us a review, it helps people find us. We'll see you all again next Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. Bye-bye, everybody.